We believe the night sky held many stories for our ancestors, but was the night sky itself controlled by a deity? There is much speculation over whether such a god existed in the times of the Proto Indo-European speaking people of the Pontic steppe over 6,000 years ago, and this is what we are going to examine as part of this video, whether there is evidence for this god, or is it all supposition? My name is John White, and I'm a specialist in Indo-European mythology, and my work helps academics and universities all over the world trace our mythology and folklore back to its roots. And so, if you want to learn more about whether there was a deity of the night in Proto-Indo-European beliefs, then grab yourself a cup of tea and welcome to Krakenfold. We are very confident that the Proto-Indo-European speaking people had a god of the sky, who was often regarded as the chief god of the Pantheon, the Skyfather, or Deus Pater, literally meaning shining godfather, but often translated as Skyfather, with a view that it is more related to the sky during the day. Now, there has been much speculation as to whether, he had more than one consort. We have a high confidence that he had a wife, the Earth Mother, in a divine relationship. But speculation has suggested that there was another consort, and perhaps this was the deity of the night sky. The idea feels right, and I think it would be a good fit in the Pantheon, but there is much thought over who this god would be, whether it was a god called Woronos, who would align to the Greek Uranus and the Vedic Varuna. And so I'm going to look at Woronos to see if Woronos was the deity of the night sky. Now, this speculation about Woronos, or sometimes called Werinus, comes from the meaning of the word the coverer. This linguistic construction of a benevolent counterpart to the Skyfather arises due to deities found in the Greek and Vedic pantheons, Uranus or Uranus and Varuna in the Vedic. And this name on the surface suggests that they arise from an older common name. They seem to be cognate. So why would a name of the coverer be used for the night sky, and what exactly do we mean by the night sky? And the best place to start to understand this idea is by looking at the creation myth of the Greeks, with Hesiod's Theogony being the most recognised. In this story, Uranus, whose name meant you were referring to the sky or heavens to the Greeks, well, he plays a crucial part in the beginning of Greek cosmogony. He is functioning both as a progenitor and as the first tyrannical ruler of the cosmos. The myths starts, as most do, with in the beginning there was chaos, and after this came the earth, Gaia, a primordial figure who would be, the mother for all the immortal deities we will eventually find on the top of Mount Olympus. And within her depths lay the shadowy Tartarus, and from that arose Eros, the god of love, whose power affected mortals and immortals alike. And from chaos came Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, and Nyx, the black night. And from night came Ether, the bright upper air, and day, whom she conceived with Erebus in a bond of love. Then earth herself gave birth to starry heaven, Uranus, equal to her in size, so that he might cover her, so as to forever provide a dwelling place that was secure for the gods. And so, at this part of the story, Uranus is the sky at night, but not the night. And this difference is important and best understood as Uranus was said to be starry, and so was the skyscape rather than the darkness of night. And this differs from Nyx, the night, and Nick is cyclical darkness who comes around every day or night. But Uranus is the permanent structure of the night sky, or the sky itself. It is just some parts make themselves seen only when night arrives, when Nix's veil spreads across the earth. But Uranus is a celestial firmament, a dome, so to speak. And this means that Uranus is not the nights or the darkness of night, but something more permanent covering the earth. Now, after this, the mythology has Uranus procreate with his mother Gaia, and the result is the 12 Titans, along with the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires, which were these three strange giants with many hands and heads. But the real point here is that Uranus is the father of the divine order, of the first non-primordial beings. We then see Uranus imprison some of his children within Gaia's depths, preventing them from seeing the light because he didn't trust them and thought they would kill him. And in doing this, he was protecting his rule, being a tyrant. But their mother, Gaia, was somewhat upset by the imprisonment of her children, which makes sense, and so she fashions a sickle from her body, and so that would be a sickle made of rock, because she is the earth, or specifically, I think it's adamant, and then suggests to her remaining children that they should rise up against their father. But it is only the Titan Kronos who is willing to help his mother. And when Uranus next comes to lie with Gaia, Kronos castrates him and with the sickle, and severs his genitals, and he casts them into the sea. And from the blood of Uranus we see the Furies, the giants, and the nymphs created. But from the foam of the genitals that's in the sea, out of that comes Aphrodite. I have a separate video on Aphrodite and where she actually comes from. And then after this, in the myths, Uranus all but disappears, becoming an almost abstract figure, a god without power who still represents the sky. And so, in summary, Uranus represents the sky, but his name is not related to Deus Vita, the Sky Father, a name which comes from the Proto Indo-Europeans. But what is also interesting is that the name of Deus Vita we see retained in the chief god of the Greeks, Zeus. And so perhaps something has happened in the mythology to move the gods around, although that is a more speculative view, and I'll deconstruct the Greek Pantheon in a minute. But first, let's have a deeper look at the linguistic evidence for Woronos, because I've sort of taken as a sort of detour, but it would all make sense in a minute. Now, the big question is, can Woronos derive from a Proto-Indo-European root, possibly reconstructed or constructed, maybe a better word, as Woronos or Werinos, based on phonetic similarities and the pattern of sky deities in Indo-European languages? Now, I will be the first to admit I'm not a linguistic expert, and so I'm relying on what others have written, and certainly there are far more doubters than believers in this theory. But let me first talk about what many of the believers of this theory think, which is that Woronos is a hypothetical deity constructed from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning the coverer or encompasser, in effect doing what Gaia of the Greek myths wanted, a covering of her, the earth. The creation of the deity's name focuses on the Pi root were, meaning to cover, surround or bind, which some believe is etymologically linked to the Greek Uranus and also the Vedic Varuna, who is also attested with the sky and cosmic order. And this represents the key part of the argument. But this is also, the part where many experienced linguistics say this link between Uranus and Varuna, is just untenable. It is just stretching possibilities too far. Now, Woronos sounds like Uranus, possibly because it was designed to. the deity's name was recreated based on the Greek and Indian names. But in reality, there is a clear lack of cognates, especially on the Greek side. And to support this linguistic connection, basically there is nothing there. And so from a linguistics point of view, it is unlikely that Woronos existed, meaning that Kronos and Varuna arrived in their pantheons by independent means. But this is a mythology channel, so let's look at the comparative mythology to see if there is anything there that can help us add weight to the argument that they are connected. Now, on the surface, it seems more than coincidence that the portrayals of Uranus and Varuna have similarities, such as they embody the heavens and they maintain cosmic order through controlling of their children or younger gods. But you could also argue that if you are a god of the night sky, you are responsible for controlling the cosmic order. That is almost a foregone conclusion to your role. And many gods had issues with their children, and this is especially so when it comes to cosmogonies that have agrarian influence. In effect, what this really means is that as much as it feels like Woronos should have existed, the evidence does not support this argument at all. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us looking at the night sky, an amazing sight, and a sky that held stories and wonders across it in the minds of our ancestors. And so you would think it would make sense that there was something that controlled it. But if the night sky consists of figures, of deities and alike, can you really have a deity controlling deities outside of the chief god? And Woronos was not a chief god, and so perhaps there was no need to have a god ruling the night because the night sky was a representation of gods and stories. But the agricultural farmers, and so what you could class as the pre-Indo-European Greeks, understood the night sky more than most, how the stars and planets moved, something required for understanding the seasons. And this allowed a god like Uranus to persist in sort of his initial cosmogonic role, well, until the Indo-European gods came along and took his power away. Or did they? And this is the other way to look at what went on. And that is by understanding what happened in Greek mythology. Now, Greek mythology is complicated, and it is so because it went through influences that are many over a long period of time. But I will try and explain how the Greek pantheon ended up as it is. Now, to start this, we have to put some context around the situation, and we mustn't forget that the Greek peninsula was a main hub in the Mediterranean, next to Anatolia, and had much influence from the Neolithic agricultural farmers in terms of trade, and this may help explain a few things. So, the creation myth of Gaia and Uranus is clearly influenced by the agricultural creation myths of the Near East, from the Sumerian creation myth to the creation myth of Dunu to the Phoenician history of the Philo of Byblos, and in the book known as the Library of Alapodorus. Now, I talk about all these in this video here, and this is well worth a watch if you want to understand the influence of the Near East on Greek mythology. And the reason I bring this up is that they all have a very similar creation myth that we see migrates from the Near East into Greece, and this is because Greece was in contact with the Near East, much more than Central and Northern Europe, and so the influence is more significant. And so if there are gods in this myth, why would they come from the Indo-Europeans if the cosmogony is agrarian? As this would mean Uranus is agrarian. And I know people say, what about Zeus? Isn't he cognate with the Indo-European deus? And so let me explain how the Greek pantheon probably came to be in its current state. We know the Indo-European pantheon had primordial beings at the start, the cosmogonic twins, Manu and Yemo, not to be confused with the divine twins. And the pantheon also had a male sky god and a female earth goddess, Diaspota and Degometa, and they had a son who was a storm god, Kronos. And this is the Proto Indo-European core pantheon. But the pantheon of the Neolithic farmers was different. It had primordial beings, but had a storm god for the male deity and a sun or sky goddess for the female deity. And then there were local fertility goddesses and gods as their children. Their pantheon was certainly less consistent at that level than the Indo-European pantheons. And so if we look at the Greek pantheon, what do we see? Well, we have a similar primordial being, a male and female deity, and children, although, to be fair, Zeus also had a large number of consorts. But if we look at the cosmogony, their primordial beings were Agrarian, Gaia and Uranus, who had children, Kronos and Rhea. And these were not Indo-European. Uranus was not Indo-European. But let me explain what else went on to put everything in perspective and to reveal a twist. So in the Greek pantheon, the Indo-European mother goddess is also not the wife of the chief god, but instead we find her as a child named Demeter, which seems to be a very strong cognate with Degometa, and instead Hera is the wife of the chief god, and Hera is almost certainly an Agrarian influenced name, and perhaps the name of the original consort of the Agrarian chief god in this region. Her husband is Zeus, cognate with Deus, the Indo-European name for a god, and a sky god at that, and this would have made the name and position suitable for being influenced by the Indo-Europeans, who were more patriarchal. And as Zeus sat in position, he took the powers of the previous tenant of that role, the storm god. This also means that if Zeus takes the storm god's power from the deity that was there, he also has to take the storm god power from his son, Percunus. And this leaves his son with no role in the pantheon. Instead, his son just keeps the mythology of the Indo-European storm god, but without power. But his name is left in what we assume to be a pre-Greek label, Heracles, meaning glory to Hera, suggesting that maybe Heracles was once the name of one of Hera's children, which can only be speculated as there is no attestation to this, but we see this figure move from being her child or the child of the divine couple to just Zeus's child, because Zeus's child was a storm god. And I think a possible explanation of this is that this happened because he has no power. Heracles has no power. A child of two gods is a god. A child of a god and a mortal is a demigod, and as such has no power. And I would say, whilst there isn't overwhelming academic consensus on this view, I feel it is the best fit based on the information we see here, that because there was an Indo-European storm god who was the son of Zeus, and the storm god's powers taken away, he still remains the son of Zeus, but keeps the name of the child that was there before of Hera. I hope that makes sense. As I say, it is complicated. In effect, the roles in the pantheon were not replaced but remained, and the Indo-European mythology changed to accommodate them. The sun sky goddess remains alongside the storm god, who is now the Indo-European chief god, and becomes more of a supreme god with his extra power. And the Indo-European earth goddess becomes but a child, especially as Gaia exists as a primordial being who represents the earth. And so the Indo-European storm god is stripped of his power and becomes a demigod. In this way, the key figures of the Indo-European pantheon are adopted into an established agricultural mythology. All the gods are there, some with just less power, and some with the older pre-Greek names, maybe Agrarian names, where their family positions already existed. And on this slide, you see that the gods in blue are the Indo-European, showing that the gods in green were Agrarian. And it clearly shows there was a significant Agrarian influence that was retained in the Greek Pantheon. And so, looking at that, it confirms that Woronos was Agrarian and not cognate with Woronos, who is Indo-European, because they're two very different language groups. And so it looks next to impossible for Woronos to exist. In effect, agriculture farmers arrived in Greece probably around 8,700 years ago, and they're pretty well established by about 7,000 years ago. And that was just as the Indo-Europeans were starting to expand, become the Yamnaya culture, and come across Europe. And so the Greeks had thousands of years for their agrarian beliefs, the Greek culture, to become established, and making it significantly harder for the stories to be erased when the Indo-Europeans did eventually come along. And so instead, mythology was altered, and was continually altered as ideas, influence and society changed. Now, I do like the idea of Woronos, the deity of the night sky, responsible for the stars, and I do believe that there must have been some divine power associated with the night sky. However, Woronos is at best a theory, and at worst a deity who, does not need to exist. But the story doesn't stop there. As I say, there is a twist, a god I never mentioned in my original video on the Proto Indo-European Pantheon. So let me just talk about Greek creation cosmogony again for just a moment. And I'll go over the story briefly. And it goes, in the beginning, there was chaos. And after this came the earth, Gaia, a primordial figure who would be the mother for all the immortal deities we find on top of Mount Olympus. And within her depths lay the shadowy realm of Tartarus, and between Tartarus and her arose Eros, the god of love, the most beautiful of beings, whose power affected mortals and immortals alike. And from chaos came Cerberus, the darkness of the underworld, and Nyx, the black night, and from night came Ether, the bright upper air, and day, whom she conceived with Erebus in a bond of love. And so here we have Nyx, the god of night. So where is the Greek Nyx in Indo-European pantheons? Is Nyx Indo-European or Agrarian? Well, Nyx is a goddess in Greek, and in Latin would be Nox, a direct cognate. We can see this develop to the Proto-Celtic Noxus and seen in the Welsh Nos, meaning night. Proto-Germanic gives Nasts, which evolves into the Old Norse Not, another female deity. And in Proto-Indo-Iranian we have Nakti or Naktam, again meaning night. Now, with Vedic Sanskrit, it retains these forms in Nakti and Naktam, although there is a name, a newer feminine noun, Ratri, and Ratri, which is a more poetic form for a goddess of the night. Although it should be pointed out that the Sanskrit Ratri does not descend from Noctis linguistically, but the idea of Ratri as a night goddess is absolutely analogous to the Greek Nyx or Norse Not. The common Pi word Nocts itself underlies the basic word for night in nearly every branch of Indo-European, and this strong linguistic cognation gives us confidence in reconstructing Nocts as the Proto-Indo-European term for night, likely perceived as a feminine entity, and a word we can feel confident was used in early Proto-Indo-European language, but for some reason Nyx ends up in the name of the night in Greek cosmogony which is filled with Agrarian names, and that is more difficult to explain in an Agrarian sourced story. So if we look at the slides I showed showing influence of names, we should replace Nix from Agrarian to Indo-European. And the reason for this is perhaps it was just as simple as a linguistic preference over a being's name when it stood for something that was really commonly said. If everybody was saying knight in Indo-European at that time, then the term knight would adopt the Indo-European word, rather than the old Agrarian word. It may not make sense. But the answers to many of these questions are wrapped up in the real complexity of Greek myth. But what we can conclude is that Noctis was not Woronos, who has no connection to Greek or Vedic cognition. It was Noctis who was the goddess of the night. But her actual position in the Pantheon is not certain. She may be a consort, she may be the mother, or maybe a sister. But her position should make any talk of Woronos redundant. Unlike the like and subscribe button, which if you press it, it will allow more people to see this video, support my channel, and will ensure the night continues to arrive after day. And with that, that was the story of the goddess of the night from the Indo-Europeans. And I hope that makes sense and allows you to understand that sometimes what we see as theory, with a little look into the complexities of mythology, we can uncover truths that are otherwise not seen. And with that, I'd like to thank all my supporters, YouTube members, patrons, and those who have hit the like and subscribe buttons for helping me keep this channel going and doing all the work I do on the mythology database. And with that, I'm going to talk about the Earth Mother and Dawn Goddess very soon. But until then, I will leave you with the latest version of the Proto Indo-European family tree of gods. And yes, thank you for all your support. Please stay safe and well. And this was Krakenford.